Welcome to episode 1 of the SCORE podcast. I'm your host, Dave Walker, founder and lead tutor at Walker Prep. Walker Prep has been helping students achieve exceptional score gains on the ACT and SAT since 2014. To learn about the incredible results we've helped our students achieve and how we can help you, visit us at walkertestprep.com. That's walkertestprep.com. All right, in today's episode, we'll be talking about one easy way to increase your ACT or SAT score, and that is learning question types. And before we get into the learning question types part, I should address the issue that I'm starting things off by suggesting something easy. Oh, here's an easy way to increase your score. And that is a little odd for me, to be completely honest, because I spend most of my time as a tutor not most of my time, but a lot of my time as a tutor, reminding people that this is not easy, that improving your test, your ACT or your SAT score there's no magic to it. There's no silver bullet. It requires, like everything else, like every other skill in the world, it requires real effort. There is not some magic formula that you can learn in 30 minutes or, an hour that's somehow going to give you a consistently and significantly higher score. So I spend a lot of time focusing on that because that is honestly oftentimes the expectation. Hey, can I just meet with you? You can give me some tips and tricks, and I will then understand the secrets I need to know to do better on the test, and I'll be set. That is just not how it works. It's like everything else. It's a skill. There is knowledge involved, but it is primarily improving your score is primarily a skill that requires getting some information about strategy and about technique, and internalizing that information and learning to apply that information or those strategies and techniques under pressure, which requires deliberate practice and consistent feedback from a professional. That's what test prep is about. So why am I kicking things off here, holding out this false promise of easy gains? Well, it's not a false promise, but it is relative. Everything is relative. So this, maybe a better way to state this would be that this is a less difficult way to increase your score. And there are several less difficult ways to increase your score, and there are always, of course, exceptions to the rule. And so that's the context for this episode. I have other, easy ways to improve your score methods on tap that I will be exploring in future podcast episodes. But for today, we are going to talk about learning question types. And given that you have the context now, this is take this the right way. This is a relatively easy way to increase your score. What do most people do when, untrained people, when they take the SAT, when they take the ACT, and they get a question, they start working on a question, what is their orientation, their general orientation to that question? Well, usually it's just going off the cuff. They're not sure what that particular question is designed to test them on, whether that be, what knowledge it's requiring of them, or what particular skill it's trying to measure. Rather, they use their intuition to, find the correct answer as best as they can without any particular agenda. That's no good, right? I mean, that is not always going to get you the wrong answer, of course, but you're much more able to consistently get the right answer if you understand what the question is trying to do and what specifically it's testing you on. These are standardized exams. The SAT, the ACT are standardized exams, which means, among other things, that the questions are designed in a very particular way that is very predictable from one test to the next. Well, they're standardized. And so the questions aren't created willy-nilly. They are created according to a recipe. And they test the same knowledge sets and the same skills in essentially the same ways over and over and over again from test to test to test. So if you know about that, then you're much better off. You can categorize things. You can put things into a box. You can understand what the agenda is, what the College Board's goal is by presenting you with that question, or the ACT organization's goal. And if you can name things and put things in categories, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get the correct answer, of course, but it really, really helps. It is a great start. So that is what we're going to focus on today. It's really not hard to learn the question types. There are quite a few, but there aren't that many. And, there are tells. These question types have tells. They have, ways of presenting themselves that are are standard from exam to exam. So you can learn to identify the question types fairly easily. And by the way, if you're a parent seeking to, well, first of all, let me back up a little bit. If you're a test prep tutor, we would hope that you are definitely aware of this and you are focusing on this issue with your students. Of course, different test prep tutors do tend to have different ways of categorizing the questions, and that's okay. Of course, my categorization system is the best one out there, of course, but other tutors have ones that are maybe almost as good as mine. So people do tend to have their own systems, and a lot of them are, all joking aside, a lot of them are just fine, are effective. But what isn't okay is not addressing this issue and not teaching your students to identify question types. So tutors, I know most tutors are already doing this. And if you're not, this definitely needs to become part of your test prep practice. It is going to help. It's going to help you get more success stories as a tutor. And of course, it's going to make your students happy because it's going to help them get higher scores. If you're a parent, and you're seeking to maybe not spend so much money on tutoring by helping your child with the SAT or ACT, this is one way you can do it. This is a simple way you can learn the question types and work with your child to help them learn the question types. Now, the way we're going to approach this today is I'm just going to go through probably one module. I'm going to go through one module of an official SAT. We could do ACT as well, of course, but I've been focusing a lot on SAT recently because of the digital SAT. And I think there haven't been a lot of recent changes with the ACT, but obviously there have been with the SAT, and people are curious about that. So, hey, why not use the digital SAT as our example for today's podcast? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the most recent official SAT, digital SAT, which would be practice test 6, and that's available in the College Board Bluebook app, which you can get from the College Board website, by the way. And if you are doing test prep, by the way, you should absolutely be practicing with official exams first and foremost. Now, you don't want to, this is a little bit of an aside, and you'll hear this from me many times if you continue listening to the podcast, but it is important. You don't want to use up all your practice tests too soon, all your official practice tests too soon, because you do want to have at least one and preferably 2 official exams to do, say, 1 or 2 weeks before your test date. So save at least 1 or 2. But if you're doing serious prep, you need to make official exams, official practice tests, the primary component of the practice material in your test prep regimen. Okay, with that said, we're going to open up an official the most recent SAT reading section. I forgot to mention this is all going to be about reading because well, the verbal side of the exam, reading and writing, because that is what I do. I do not do math. So on this podcast, we will be focusing exclusively on reading and writing. If we do ACT, it'll be ACT reading, ACT English, and maybe some ACT science. I actually do tutor that, but I don't tutor the math. I'm going to occasionally have math people on as special guests. But yeah, for the most part, assume that when I'm talking about ACT and SAT, I'm talking about the verbal stuff. All right, so we're going to open to Module 1 of Reading and Writing of Practice Test 6. And because this is a standardized exam, not only are the question types easy to categorize because they're always presented in exactly the same way or with just a few predictable variations, but the progression of the question types is essentially the same from test to test. So in other words, the first few questions you're going to get every time you open up a reading and writing section of the digital SAT, the first few questions you're going to get are what I call vocabulary in context questions. And they are very easy to identify because 99% of them are worded exactly the same way. I mean, first of all, you should know that you're on vocab and context questions because it's the first few questions you get. But in addition to that, here is how they are worded. Which choice completes the text with the most logical and precise word or phrase? 99.9% of vocabulary and context questions are worded exactly like that. So there are some questions that have similar wording, so it's important that you remember where to expect them on the exam. That's going to be at the beginning of every reading and writing module. And remember the exact wording. And then you'll always know that when you're dealing with a vocab and context question. People have different names for this question type. The College Board calls it words in context. Some people just call them vocab questions, vocabulary questions. I sort of mix the two and call them vocabulary and context. These are more similar. We're not going to get into the ins and outs of the question types and the strategies and whatnot in today's session. But these, to just tell you a little bit about these questions, vocab questions or vocab and context questions on the digital SAT are more similar to the sort of classic SAT vocabulary questions because they do involve some higher level vocabulary than you saw in the previous version of the SAT. But context is still really, really important. It's not just a conventional question where they present you with a word and say, here are 4, potential definitions. Choose the right definition. No, the words always appear in context, and you have to use that context to select the correct answer. Okay, so on this particular exam, Module 1, question 1 is vocab and context. Question 2 is vocab and context. Question 3 is vocab and context. Question 4 is vocab and context. And then with question 5, we get a switch, right? And I'll read that question to you. It says, which choice best states the main purpose of the text? Right. Well, it's pretty easy to figure out what question type this is, and that would be a main idea or main purpose question. Usually get 1 or 2 of these right after vocab and context. So those ones are pretty self-evident. In this case, you only get 1. And so the next question on this module is, which choice best describes the function of the underlined portion? Well, these ones are very easy to figure out too. I mean, a lot of them are, not all of them, but these are just what I call function questions. You have to just figure out the purpose or function of the underlined portion, or sometimes it's a complete sentence. And again, we're not going to get into all the strategies for this stuff today, but those question types are easy to identify, and you want to do so. Okay, so number 7, we're going back to a previous type. 7 says, which choice best states the main purpose of the text? So that's just like 5. They did a main purpose, then they went to function, and then they went back to main purpose. Number 8 here, you usually get 1 of these per test. And I'll read the question to you. based on the texts, plural, how would the author of text 2 most likely respond to the underlying claim in text 1? So this is the only question type that will give you 2 passages. As many of you know, on the digital SAT, the passages are very short compared to the previous length. Or here we have 2 quote unquote passages, but they're each 2 or 3 sentences. Okay. So each so-called passage is just a couple few sentences. And you'll get one question, usually positioned about right here, where they're just asking you to compare or contrast the 2 passages. All right. So number 9, we're going back to main idea, main purpose again. Which choice best states the main idea of the text? A lot of times they'll do these consecutively, but on this one, they're sort of, interspersing them among other question types. So that's the third one of those. And then, okay, now we move on. We move on to command of evidence questions. And what you want to keep in mind is once you hit command of evidence questions, and I'll tell you how to identify those in a second. Once you hit command of evidence questions, you're done for that module. You're done with all the other question types we just hit. So you're not going to get any more vocab and context. You're not going to get any more main purpose, main idea, passage comparison, function. All of that is over, and you're going to be on command of evidence for a while. This question reads, and this is 10 on this exam, question 10, which choice most effectively uses data from the table to complete the statement? Which choice most effectively uses data from the table to complete the statement? This is a command of evidence question. And we need to, and there are 3 types. I have broken down command of evidence questions into 3 subtypes. And in order to know what subtype we're dealing with, we need to read the statement that we are supposed to complete. I mean, once you get the hang of this, you'll already know. But for, since I'm explaining the question types today, the statement we're going to complete is the last sentence of the passage. And it reads, among candidate species for de-extinction, this problem, whatever problem the passage was talking about, would be especially concerning for the... All right, so on this question, and it's not super obvious from that sentence, but on these types of questions, we're providing basically an example to support whatever claim the passage made. And in this case, we're going to use data from the table to provide that example. It's a supporting example, right? So what we're doing with this particular question type, this type of command of evidence question, is supporting a claim. And so I call these logical operations support. Now, the reason I call them logical operations support is because I want to stress to my students that these questions are very much about your understanding of logic. And in order to really master this question type, because there's more than meets the eye on most of these questions, and it really helps to have a basic familiarity with a sort of introductory level formal logic. It's not rocket science. It's not, it's nothing. It sounds sort of intimidating, formal logic. But if you can do algebra and geometry, you can understand the basics of formal logic. So, and it really helps on this question type. So I like alluding to that in my designation for the question type. And so that's why I say logical operations and then in support, because what we're doing here is we're supporting a claim. So we usually get quite a few of these. See number 11. We're going to get another one. It's worded a little bit differently. This one says, which quotation from the yellow wallpaper most effectively illustrates the claim? So notice what we're doing here. We're illustrating a claim. In other words, we're giving a supporting example of a claim. And this time, the claim, instead of being in a sort of scientifically oriented passage with a table, the claim is regarding, in this case, a short story. but it doesn't change the basic aspect, the essential nature of what you're doing, which is supporting a claim. So this would be logical operations support. Okay. When they quote even a poem or a short story or a newspaper article, and they ask you to choose a quotation from the answer choices that illustrates some claim, it's just another version of logical operations support, and all the basic strategies still apply. Moving on to question 12. Isn't this exciting? Which choice most effectively uses data from the table to complete the comparison? Does that sound familiar? Because it's very similarly worded to question 10, right? And it is the same question type, logical operations support. The last sentence of the passage, the one we have to complete, is setting up a supporting example where you have to use for a claim that was made in the passage, and we have to use data from the table to complete that supporting example. So logical operations support. We're supporting a claim. 13. Which finding, if true, would most directly support the idea advanced by that name I can't pronounce in the passage? Oh, that sounds familiar, doesn't it? We're asked to directly support an idea. In other words, we're supporting a claim. So this is another logical operations support question. As I said, you usually get a handful of these, and they are a subtype of command of evidence. All right, now we move on to a different type of logical operations question, different type of command of evidence question. And the nice thing about these is the question wording is always exactly the same. Why they sort of shift the wording somewhat, they have a few different ways of wording logical operations support, whereas this other type, they always word exactly the same. I'm not really sure, but I'm glad they do because it makes it easier to identify the question type. So this question, number 14, goes, which choice most logically completes the text? And every single time you see that wording, which choice most logically completes the text? That is going to be a type of command of evidence question that we call not logical operations support, but logical operations deduction, because what you're asked to do in these questions is not provide a supporting example anymore, but draw a logical conclusion or a strictly logical inference or logical deduction from the information stated in the passage. Okay. Again, having basic knowledge of formal logic really can help with these. You'll notice the last sentence of the passage, which we're asked to complete on these, almost always start with a cause and effect transition word, such as thus, or consequently, or therefore. So we're completing a statement, a sentence that starts with thus, or consequently, or as a result, or therefore. It's pretty obvious that what we're being asked to do is draw a logical deduction from the claims in the passage, the information in the passage. So that's 14. Usually get a few of these as well. Let's see. 15. Which choice most logically completes the text? That's going to be another logical operations deduction. And the text that we're completing on this one, the last sentence of the passage that we have to complete, starts with therefore. All right. 16. All right. So there was only a couple of logical deduction questions on this exam. It seems like more recently, perhaps it's more so on module 2, they've been throwing quite a few of these logical operations deduction questions at people. So that is definitely an important question type. But with 16, we move on to the writing section, and we know we've moved on to the writing portion of the reading and writing section. We know we've moved on to the writing portion because of this wording, this question wording that is always the same and always signals that you've switched to, punctuation and grammar questions. We get which choice completes the text so that it conforms to the conventions of standard English. That tells you you have moved on to the writing portion, and you are going to be focused on grammar rules and punctuation, things of that nature for a while. 17, same exact wording. Which choice completes the text so it conforms to the conventions of standard English? Now, there are various types of these questions. Some that, focus on commas, some that focus on semicolons versus em dashes versus colons, punctuation. Some that are focused on subject-verb agreement or pronouns and various other issues. And there are ways to figure that out by looking at the answer choices, but we're not going to get into that because that is more involved. That is more complex. That's not the kind of thing I could go over in a podcast episode and have anyone want to keep listening. So, but let's see, 18, same thing. Which choice completes the text so it conforms to the conventions of standard English? 19, same thing. 20, same thing. You usually get quite a few of these in a row. And you have to tell the various subtypes, by looking at the answer choices. 21, same. Okay, now 22, we've moved on to a different question type. And luckily, these are also all worded exactly the same every single time. And they go like this. Which choice completes the text with the most logical transition? So guess what? These are transition questions. Very easy to identify. They have very particular tactics that you want to use every time. And if you recognize the question type and know the tactics, well, you can do that and increase your score. Usually get a few of these. 23 is also transition. 24 also transition, exact same wording. 25, which choice completes the text with the most logical transition? 26, we have moved on to the final question type you're going to face on a reading and writing section of the digital SAT. These are always the last ones, and these are just simply called notes questions. And I'll read you the question, and you'll see why they're called that. The student wants to emphasize so-and-so's achievement, period. Which choice most effectively uses relevant information from the notes to accomplish this goal? And then on the left-hand side, there's no passage. There's just a series of bullet points, which are the notes that they ask you to refer to. They suggest you need to refer to. But if you know the correct strategy for this question type, you almost never need to refer to the notes, actually. But again, we're not doing strategy today, so you'll just have to check back later if you want to learn about that. And then there are 27 questions per module, per reading and writing module. So that was 26. So 27 is going to be notes as well, and that's going to be the last one. And sure enough, the first sentence will be different, but the second sentence will always be exactly the same. So that's when the first sentence says the student wants to specify some specific thing they want to specify. And then the second sentence is the giveaway. Which choice most effectively uses relevant information from the notes to accomplish this goal? The second sentence of every notes question will say exactly that. So you know you're dealing with a notes question, and hopefully you've studied the strategies and tactics for that question type and you knock it out. If you don't know the strategies and tactics for this question type, they can actually be quite daunting and time-consuming. And so it's no fun that they show up last because usually by then people are tired and they are getting short on time. However, if you know the strategies for this question type, it's just the opposite. They're really fast and easy. So yeah, knowing strategies is obviously really important, but knowing strategies doesn't do you any good if you don't know the question types first, right? That is the first step. You first have to know the question type and then go, all right, hopefully I can remember the strategies and tactics and maybe punctuation or grammar rules that are associated with that question type. So yes, learning question types, it's certainly not self-contained, but it is essential and it is fairly easy. If we were to go through Module 2, you're going to see the same exact progression of the same exact question types. And if we were to go to Practice Test 5 or any other practice test, any other official digital SAT practice test, the layout is going to be essentially the same. The question types are going to be exactly the same. The ways that they're worded, although some have variations, even those variations are going to be the same. There's a certain set of variations, and once you know them, you know them. They're going to be the same on every single test. And boy, once you know that information, does it help to make you feel more confident and in control of the situation. So I highly recommend that as a first step. Focus on learning question types. It can make your life a lot easier and help improve your score. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, please give it a like to help others discover the show. Tomorrow will be an episode of what I'm calling standardized answers. That's where I answer listeners' questions about everything test prep. To get the ability to submit questions and ideas for show topics, as well as full access to the Standardized Answers podcast, every weekly drill, and the Friday Deep Dive podcast, become a premium subscriber. So this is the Monday editions of the podcast are going to be free. The Standardized Answers, where I answer listener questions, and these are questions submitted by paid subscribers, premium subscribers. There'll be a free sample. You'll be able to listen to part of the show for free, but most of the show will be exclusive for premium subscribers, as will be the deep dive podcast that I do on Fridays. Those will be of special interest to test prep nerds, probably tutors, in other words, or just anyone who may be ambitious students or parents who really want to help their children increase their scores. We'll be doing deep dives on issues related to the SAT and ACT, sometimes in general, and sometimes with maybe particularly thorny questions that are maybe don't seem to conform to the standard design, or maybe the standard strategies don't seem to actually work against this particular question. That's usually misperception. Usually the strategies do work. Usually it actually is a standard type, but there can be slight variations and misdirection that makes it really difficult to see how the question works, even if you know the strategies and question types well. So we'll be including some of that on some of those types of questions, I think, in some of our Friday deep dives. I look forward to that. Thank you for listening, and I will see you next time.